Well, let's get started. I've got 7 o'clock. My name is Jeff Harvey. I'm the president of the Hayden Lake Watershed Association, and I want to welcome you all to the Zoom meeting. I wish, like everybody else, we were at the country club where we could meet face to face, but in these times it's just not possible. This is the best we can do. It does have some constraints. Many of you had questions. And we have already relayed those to the speakers. I relayed all the questions to all the speakers because some of them overlapped, and hopefully they will incorporate those initial pre-registration questions you had into what they say. Will is also checking the chat box, I guess it is, on the Zoom. And any questions you have, you type those into that chat box. Will collect those at the end, and we will direct them to the speaker who can answer them. Unfortunately, that's a constraint we have with this type of format. First, I want to introduce the boards of both the association and the district. But before that, I do that, I kind of want to draw the difference between those two because people get confused. The Hayden Lake Watershed Association is just that. It's an association. We are basically a interest group that is advocating for the protection and enhancement of Hayden Lake and its watershed. And the watershed is very important. You'll hear that a couple times tonight because so goes the quality of the watershed, so goes the quality of our lake. The district, the Hayden Lake Watershed Improvement District, is a subdivision of the government of the state of Idaho. It's a district created under Idaho law. It charges a fee to all the private landowners. Basically, its district boundary or all the private lands in the sections that touch Hayden Lake. Fees charged a modest fee. I like to refer to mine as about a latte or two a year. Is about what it costs, and that district takes those monies and spends them on specific projects, specific actions to enhance or protect and enhance the lake. And it does a number of different functions, and I'll mention some of those as we go on. So I want to introduce the directors first. Our vice president is Jen, and if you would say hello, that will reference your box and people will see who you are.
Hello.
Our vice president is Jan Wilkins. Our treasurer is Barb Neal.
Hi there.
Will Neal is our communications director, the fellow who makes all this happen.
Hello.
Gloria Lund is probably one of the oldest acting members of the board. Gloria, say hello. Okay. Let's see, Gil Rosner.
How you doing?
And Todd Walker. I don't know if you're here or not, Todd.
Mary Ann says no.
Evidently not. The other member is Chris Meyer. So those are the members of the board of the association. The district, the chairman of the district is Steve Meyer.
Steve here.
I believe Leo Notar is traveling and not here. He's the secretary treasurer, and Pat Lund is the other board member. Pat, got to say something. Okay. Anyway, Pat is the other board member. I want to start very quickly with a state of the lake. I like to start with a state of the lake and a state of the watershed as we see it. And a lot of this comes right from the water quality monitoring that the district is doing. First, the water quality of the main body of the lake is doing very well. And when I say the main body, I mean the deep portion of the lake, really south of Henry's Point. That water quality is doing very well. We have 3-4 years of data showing that. This particular year, the parameter we look at the closest is total phosphate and orthophosphate. Total phosphate's averaging 4.7, and we look at those because that's what drives algal growth which can diminish water quality. Total phosphate sitting at 4.7 micrograms per liter, which is well below the historic average of 7.5 micrograms per liter. And orthophosphate, and that's the phosphate that actually drive algal growth, it hasn't risen above detection in this year's data yet. The other good news from the monitoring on the lake is the district completed, or pretty close to completing, 3.5 years of monitoring the phosphorus loading from the south shore of the lake. And that was modeled to be a very significant input when that was done. It was done with models. The district has now actually measured that, and that number is a lot lower than we thought it was, which is good news, but obviously we still want to be careful about those inputs, but they're not nearly as large as the models, the export models had represented them to be. The dimmer news is basically in the North Arm. The district also completed this year 3 years of monitoring up there. In the North Arm, and when I say that, the area north of Henry's Point is a very different lake. It's a very shallow part of the lake. It was created by the impoundment of the lake in 1910 and some creative plugging of very fast discharging areas that discharge very rapidly to the Rathdrum Prairie Aquifer with bentonite. And so that area was very different. It was inundated in the spring and dried out in the summertime. Before 1910, after 1910, or right in that ballpark, it became part of the lake. Very different. It's shallow. It has very high phosphoruses, and both total and orthophosphate, and those are orthophosphates often measurable up there. In fact, we talk about the main lake as being phosphorus limited, the growth of algae being phosphorus limited in the main lake. In the north end, it's not limited by phosphorus. It has plenty of phosphorus to grow algae and weeds and everything else. What really limits it appears to be nitrogen. And that's why as summers wear on, warm summers wear on, and we get depletion of the nitrogen sources that were washed in from the watershed, you get blue-green algal blooms, because they're the only algae that do not need, basically can fix nitrogen out of the air. And someone said we have a new member from Fernan. That's exactly what's happening on Fernan Lake. Fernan Lake is very much like our North Arm. And by the way, there's an algal bloom going on it right now. So very similar situation. The other thing the district is monitoring, gives us an insight in the lake. We're looking at Mocken Slough, and that's the Mocken Slough is the area within the sandbar on Mockens Bay. So Mockens Bay outside, Mocken Slough is the area right there up against Mivenden and forest land. And we're looking at the east end of O'Rourke Bay as well. Those are two areas we also suspect were inundated when they put in the dike. So far, and I've looked at 4 or 5 weeks of data and graphed it, it looks like their water quality is acting much more like that of the main lake than the North Arm. So that's good news as well. So that's sort of the state of our lake. The watershed, not a lot of activity in the watershed. We're going to talk about the Forest Service component of that. They do have a program called Kootenai Fuels, and some of you may have seen that around your properties up around English Point, and it's also going around the south border of the forest border on the south side of the lake, and they're basically cutting out a buffer, fire buffer. Not really a big impact. We have seen, and Craig Davidson's here to talk about code enforcement. We have seen some about 2 or 3 developments that were pretty bad. One of them was specifically bad, and I'll deal with that later, as far as erosion and sedimentation to the lake. So we have seen that going on in the watershed. we've not seen any big overall developments or anything like that that has concerned us too much. So that's sort of the state of the lake and the water. There'll be a number of, or in the watershed, I'm sorry. There will be a number of, well, wait a minute, I'll go back. I do want to talk about some of the highlights of what the associations worked on this year, some things that won't come up in the talks, at least that much. The real highlights, first of all, we've done a very large public education program with the district, and Jan Wilkins for the association and Marianne Stahl for the district have done a terrific job in educating on boat wake education. Some of you may have seen the cards that have gone out and put on people's windows. We've given hundreds, maybe thousands of those away. My job is to go down and pick up afterward and find out how many are left over. And people take those things. We see very few of them that get thrown in the trash. And I do check the trash cans down at Honeysuckle. So it seems to be a very effective program that's going on. We also worked very hard to get a 500-foot excessive wake limit for Hayden Lake. We only got 300 feet excessive wake limit. But we are developing, Will right now is developing on our website a complaint. We want to monitor how effective both the 200-foot limit and the 300-foot limit for excessive wake are. So we want to, Will's putting together a complaint registry on our website, and we're looking for substantive information that we can share with the county commissioners. We want to know if these wakes and the wake activities are causing damage or not. And we're asking for very specific information in there, as much as you can give us, because that's what's going to be telling. We're also trying to tool up to put some remote cameras out to actually measure wakes and try to pick up the boat that caused that wake. So we want to monitor those wake limits and find out if they're effective or not. Now that they've been set, well, one's been set for years. Now that one's been marked, and Steve will talk about that, and the other one's been set. I'll talk about what we've been doing with Honey Badger a little later. Everything the association is done by volunteers. Nobody gets paid in the association. And so what we do, it's all volunteer. So we certainly appreciate your dues. We certainly appreciate your contributions, and thank you for them. But we need people to work with us to help us. We learned a long time ago in the association that the federal government, the state government, and the county government were not going to do a darn thing to protect our lake, that we were going to have to do it ourselves. And that's exactly why the association reinvigorated the Watershed Improvement District to do just that. So we have an infrastructure to protect Hayden Lake, but we need folks to work with us to do that. So with that, did Dan Scaife ever come on, Will?
No, I have not seen him.
Well, we were going to have Ranger Dan Scaife of the Coeur d'Alene River Ranger District here, and he just disappeared from sight about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and usually that means they send him off on a fire on the other end of the country someplace this time of year with the Forest Service, which is a problem. The reason we wanted Dan to speak was to talk about the Honey Badger project, but I guess I'm going to have to stand in for Dan, and then we'll get on to the rest of the speakers. Honey Badger is a planning project that the Forest Service is carrying out right now. And the Forest Service used to plan this little timber sale or that little timber sale, or on a little bigger scale, but not very much. Now they plan on huge landscape levels. Honey Badger reaches from the Bunko Divide all the way to Fernand Saddle. Treasure Mountain's actually part of it. So it's a huge landscape. Turns out that 60% of the watershed of the lake, and like I said, the watershed's important because its quality dictates the quality of our lake. 60% of that watershed is managed by the U.S. Forest Service. And this planning project, Honey Badger, is going to deal with that management. And they're going to deal with that 60% of our watershed. So you bet we're very interested. We have provided substantive comment in both the pre-scoping and what they call the scoping phase. And when I say substantive, we've gone into the old TMDL documents and the management plans, and we've designated specific erosion sources and specific potential erosion sources on the forest land that need to be addressed in this particular project. And we've also given them substantive alternatives. One, for instance, is don't know how many of you are familiar, but with Forest Service Road 437, you may not know it by that name, but that's the road that goes from the north end of Hayden Lake up past the shooting range, meets the old Ohio Match Road. And it is a poster child for the misuse of our national forests, literally. And so we have just an example of the substantive changes we've tried to drive. We have given them an alternative to that route. We basically proposed they shut that route down and replace it with a much a different route. Traveling with 437, it hangs right over Hayden Lake. If you're there during a rainstorm, and some of our board was in early July, it puts sediment right straight into Hayden Creek from it. And so we've proposed they do away with that road and replace it with a road that would cross exactly one small branch of Nielsen Creek and otherwise be completely away from the stream system completely. So those are the sort of substantive things we did. Where Honey Badger is, there are some real questions, and I'm sorry Dan isn't here because I had some real questions for him tonight. The real question is they're proposing to do a huge amount of work on the watershed. So if you look at our watershed, its problem is that it is a very old forest stand. The fire history show that the last time the Hayden watershed burned was in the 1750s. So if you do the math, it's 300 years, pushing 300 years in a fire cycle that's 300 years old. In other words, fires, you'll get a stand replacing fire like the Great 1910 fire, the Sundance fire, if you're familiar with those. You'll get one of those on roughly every 300 years in our climate. Maybe pushed a little up by global warming, but that's the ballpark. Well, we're well out on that. I mean, we're approaching that 300 years. The Forest Service knows that. They have a forest that's full of what they call climax type species, white fir, hemlock, and that sort of thing, and not very what they call long-lived cereals, the ponderosa pine, the white pine. White pine, of course, was decimated by blister rust. Larch, those Douglas fir, those species that last over a long period of time, but are more fire resistant. So they've got a big inventory of non-fire resistant and disease susceptible trees and a low inventory. And it's simply because where they are, well, it's really there for two reasons. The forest was high graded. They dogged out the good stuff and left the bad stuff. The other reason is that they're just this far along on the natural fire cycle in the watershed. So there's two solutions for that. They can either let her burn, and that will be real nice for the lake for a good period of time. And it's not in the nature of the Forest Service to do that. And the other is they're proposing some pretty large landscape cutting in the national forest. I mean, the National Forest Management Act allows 40-acre clear cuts unless a case can be made to the regional forester to increase it. Well, they're proposing some, I think one of those things is 1,100-acre clear cuts. And you will see those from Hayden Lake, believe me. So we're very interested. We understand where the Forest Service is because it's kind of an either or. Either you manage the forest or it's going to burn. I mean, it's build up the fuels. The fire cycles are like COVID-19 and the 1918 flu. They're going to come along. They're going to affect you. And the fire cycle, we're just pushing it in this watershed. So the Forest Service has I think they're planning to manage something like 25 to 30% of the acreage in the watershed, and that's pretty massive. What we don't know, and what I'd like to ask the ranger is, how quickly are you going to do this? So we think it can be done, but it's going to have to be over a long time horizon, 25, 30 years. You can't do this in 2 or 3 years, or we're going to have real sedimentation problems. So what is not answered in anything we've seen is, and we've asked the question, over what time period are you going to do this? So we're tracking honey badger very closely. Like I say, we know where the problems are, and we've recommended those problems to be fixed. With the unknown is, you're going to do a huge amount of operation on the national forest. How quickly are you going to do that? Because of course, if they do it quickly, we can expect a lot of sedimentation coming into our lake. If they do it over a reasonable time horizon, it probably will be ameliorated. So that's kind of where we are on honey badger. I wish Dan were here to deal with this subject, but I've done my best with it I can. So if you have questions about that, certainly send them to Will, and I'll do my best to either answer them tonight or get you an answer if I can't answer it tonight. I'd like to go next to Steve Meyer, who's the chairman of the Hayden Lake Watershed Improvement District. And the district does a lot of things. It supports the lake manager. It supports a public education program that Marianne Stahl carries out, lake manager Todd Walker. It also does the dock and debris removal. You may have all seen a piece in the paper where Commissioner Folius was talking about a derelict dock down in Coeur d'Alene Lake, and I sent him an email saying, we've managed to successfully deal with that problem on Hayden Lake, and we've done it. It's something that the district does. It removes our derelict docks and debris out of the lake. And it does all the monitoring that I spoke about. We don't know where we're going on the lake if we don't have monitoring. So it does all those things. But what Steve's here to talk about tonight is the navigational buoy system. The association got a grant from the district. It brought all the agencies together that manage the lake, and believe me, there's a bunch of them, and got them on a room over at the country club. One of the new proposals made by the district was a system of 21 legal buoys, because there was a whole hodgepodge of buoys out there that weren't legal and were, God knows, no one knew exactly how far any one of them was from shore. And the limit at that time was 200 feet, the no-wake limit still is. So Merlin Feichelson actually proposed 21 buoys. That got negotiated down to 14. At one point, it got knocked down to 8. Steve successfully got it back up to 14. And so now we're in the throes of getting those installed. So Steve, I'll give you the floor.
The quick answer is that the buoys are here. The anchors will be here Tuesday. And Tommy Fry says he will start putting the buoys in on Wednesday. That's the Wednesday, the 19th. It's been a long and a little bit challenging road to get here. And rather than review all of that, which I'm happy to do, if you wish to know more, why send a question to Will, and at the end we can talk about more detail. Most of the illegal buoys have been removed voluntarily. We started off with almost 50, and the last count official count was 5 remaining. The Department of Lands, who has authority to regulate these things in the lake, acquiesced to having the district pick up the remaining illegal buoys as we go around to place the new ones. In the meantime, I guess one of the benefits of the delay, a number of additional illegal ones have been removed, and I don't think there's many left, maybe 2 or 3. So, and we will remove those, keep them, mark the lat long of their location. The owners can come pick them up because it is their private property. It's just in an illegal place. And so if they want them back, they'll have a chance to get them back. We'll probably keep them through the fall. And then the next measure here is to try to get an assessment from the sheriff's office, and we'll get a lot of input from lake users about whether 14 is enough. One of the most common questions I've had in the last month is, how can I get a legal buoy in front of my place? And as you've read, that's a complex answer, which is simply stated, you can't. But if there's evidence that more are needed, we'll go through the process of working with the Marine deputies and then apply to the Idaho Department of Lands to permit some more. Lands is open to doing that. So this is a process of trying to find a middle ground between how many are needed and to what extent can we get a cooperative nature amongst the boat users to stay away from the shore and stay out in the middle. So we're trying. Send your questions if you have more to Will.
And I just want to add to that, again, we're doing a whole lot of work on the education, both Marianne and Jan, because we promised to do part of that education, and we're doing it, and it's a very robust program that's going on right now. Anything else, Steve?
I think that's it.
Okay,
There's a lot more story to tell, but let's move on to, it's all history, and let's look forward to what we do next.
yeah, and one other thing, we're developing, we don't know if the district will end up with this or the association. We are also developing a program to make application for a buoy near you. Let's put it this way, put it that way. We recognize, district recognizes 14 is probably not the be all and end all. We need some system to gather up everybody's input from the public on how this is, people live around the lake, how this is going. And so we're another thing Will's working on, and I think it's lower down than the complaint registry, is a system where you can make application or for another one, another buoy. But they're going to be specific. Again, it's not going to be in my front yard. It's going to be specific to need and to complaints and those sorts of things. So buoys marking the 200-foot limit are part of the equation. Justin Arts is with us tonight from the Sheriff's Marine Patrol to deal with the other side of it, and that is enforcement on the lake. The Sheriff's Marine Patrol gets to be the referees between the public, which has the full right to use the lake because the lake belongs to the public, and the shore owners whose property, both docks, boats, and shoreline can be damaged. One commissioner we have believes that, boy, all we have to do is enforce, and that's the panacea. We don't need that, anything more. The association believes that we need markers so the public has a fair notion where the limits are. but we also need enforcement. So with that, Justin, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, sir. We're actually really excited to see how these buoys kind of turn out, because the rest of the county, at least the people that live on other lakes in their county, are kind of watching to see how this kind of plays out, with boaters recognizing those buoys and kind of allowing them to gauge how far they should be from shore. So I'm really excited to see them get implemented, and I'm hoping that it's effective enough to where we can use them in other parts of our county. But we'll see how it goes. So as far as enforcement on the lake so far this year, we've had obviously a very different type of year, given the COVID-19 crisis that's kind of been happening. If you haven't noticed, there's probably been a whole lot more activity on Hayden than you've seen in years past. And that is not unique just to Hayden Lake. That is been the kind of the standard on all the lakes in Kootenai County, to include Spokane River, Coeur d'Alene Lakes, Hauser, Twin Lakes. All of the lakes have seen an uptick in recreational use on the river and on the lakes, because there's not a lot of other things to do right now. We've also seen a huge uptick in out-of-state boaters, and Hayden Lake have seen just the same. And again, it's because of our surrounding states are being a lot more restrictive than Idaho is. And so they have flooded to Idaho to do what they normally would want to do in the summertime. So a lot of what we are seeing this year is due to just some extenuating circumstances that I hope we don't have that in the future, but it is causing some more problems. So I get phone calls a lot, and I know that there's a lot of issues on Hayden Lake, and I'm not ignorant to those. But I think the steps that we're taking with the buoys to help, especially with the wake surfing, that seems to be one of the biggest concerns because of the size of the wakes and how it's creating damage against people's property and docks. We're hoping that being able to visually gauge off of those new buoys, that'll help educate the boaters that are out there and kind of push them out towards more of the middle of the lake. The other thing that I'll just kind of touch on real quick, the city of Hayden is trying to address the Honeysuckle boat launch right now as far as its constant congestion. And they're looking at some different parking scenarios, some different methods of kind of speeding up the boat launch. And they're also considering charging a much higher rate or limiting how many out-of-state boaters are permitted to use the boat launch. So that's up to the city of Hayden, but that is something that they're addressing just because of the increased amount of activity that we've seen on the lake. It's just kind of overloading our public park there. So those are some of the things that we've seen. We have been on the lake as much as we physically can be this summer, just to kind of give you an idea of what my teams are comprised of. I've got 4 teams, so 2-man teams. One team is always at the south end of Coeur d'Alene Lake. I've got a team at the north end of Coeur d'Alene, a team on the Spokane River, and then a roving team. You guys are considered a roving lake. So you guys get to share one team for Hayden Lake, the lower end of Pend Oreille, Spirit Lake, both of Twin Lakes, and Hauser Lake and Fernan. That being said, Hayden definitely gets the most enforcement. If you look at the man hours that we've done so far this year, Hayden's received well over 200 man hours from that roving team, whereas the other lakes are still in the double digits. Just because Hayden obviously is a little bit larger and just has a lot more activity on it, we tend to patrol it a lot more. It's not as much as I would like. Personally, I would like to have a full-time team on Hayden every day of the week, but that's not my decision. That's just my wish. So if you have questions about maybe some of the statistics of what we've seen so far this year, I can kind of give you some of that. We've issued several citations. We've seen anything, nothing out of the ordinary as far as, we've issued citations for wake zone violations, safety equipment violations. We've had several OUIs, and those are kind of some of the basic stuff that we've seen. We've had a couple accidents on Hayden Lake already so far this year, nothing serious. And a lot of the questions that I've gotten from other associations are, well, what have you done to enforce the new commissioner's ordinance that just came out this year? And because it is new and because it is it's difficult to kind of relay what that new ordinance is. We've done a lot of education this year, but what we have found is a lot of the wake surfers are already well aware of what that new ordinance is. And we've been pleasantly surprised about how many of them know that there is a new law, what the distance is. They're not always going to be perfect as far as judging 300 feet from shore, because that's what the new ordinance requires if you're going to create an excessive wake. However, we've been pleasantly surprised on how much education the boaters have actually received somehow about what the new ordinance is. So we've done a lot of education when we do see those violations, which haven't been as much as we anticipated, but they have definitely still been happening. We've primarily done educational warnings on those, but if they violated the actual no wake zone, which was prior to this year, at the 200 foot, those are the people that we have cited for no wake zone violations. Any specific questions, Jeff?
I don't have any specific questions, but I urge anybody who has them to put them in, and we'll try to answer them at the end. If we don't do that in this format, maybe we have enough people we can just ask questions to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we move on, Craig Davison is Kootenai County Enforcement.
Can I just say something?
I'm sorry, yes.
Jeff? I would like to compliment the sheriff's deputies for their enforcement activities. I know personally 2 of our friends have been pulled over and they were pretty shocked. So I know they've been active, and I know that they've been out there, and I'm also happy to hear that you feel like that the education efforts must be working, since a lot of those boaters know the rules. They just are having too much fun, or can't judge distance, or whatever it is. So it is an ongoing process. But what? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. My husband is saying, don't forget to also tell Justin that even though our friends were not happy to be pulled over, they were very complimentary about the way the sheriffs handled their violations. So
I appreciate that, and I do love hearing that. Just to kind of give you an idea, statistically compared to years past, this year, because of the way the weather kind of held off for a while, our season truly didn't get started until about the beginning of July.
right.
So July 4th was really our first busy weekend.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately we had that terrible double plane crash in Coeur d'Alene, which consumed about 8 days for my Marine division, where all my resources were consumed by that. So really the statistics that we've seen so far out on the lake is about 5 weeks worth of work. And if you compare that to even years past, it's substantially higher than what we've even been able to accomplish in the years past. So when we look at citations, hours on the water, warnings, and boat inspections, our numbers are actually quite high, which is great. And I kind of add that into, I think, why the boaters are being a lot more educated, at least with the new ordinance.
Okay. Now we'll try to move on. I want to introduce Craig Davidson, Kootenai County Enforcement. And we've seen, I want to kind of preface this by saying we've seen an uptick in building around the lake in the past 2 years. But the buildings usually mainly single family homes or improvements, rather than, we haven't seen any real large subdivisions show up like in years past. We have seen 3 complaints. One of them was pretty massive, and it was just down the road from me, and I heard from one of my neighbors who finally came back for the summer and found the results of that not only in their backyard but in the lake just the other day. I supplied her with all the pictures I had of it. That one was a case of not even having a permit, not even having a site disturbance permit, going ahead digging it right during the holidays, right in the holiday season. And by the way, it was raining and snowing like crazy. That's kind of the worst case scenario. We'd like to hear from Craig on, I guess, what I like to hear, and maybe you'd like to hear as well. We'd like to hear about code enforcement and just to educate our members, but also these situations where somebody obviously breaks the law and then they get a permit 4 or 5 days later. You know, what's up with that? It just seems to me that violating the law and then begging forgiveness works pretty well in Kootenai County. So hope that didn't put it on you too bad, Craig.
No, Jeff, actually you have. Thank you for that, and I appreciate it. And David Callahan, our director, extends his graciousness for allowing this opportunity as well. I did put together a PowerPoint presentation, but sometimes that's boring. And the reason I did that is more so you guys, because I know you're big on education of your homeowners and the residents around the lake. So I've given it to Will, so you got it. So if you want to post on your website electronically or what have you, I'm just going to peruse through it. I'm not going to hit every line item, but I'm going to go in a format if that's all right.
Okay, right.
The first slide, basically our mission, vision, and what we do. I'll skip down to what we do. Obviously, we investigate the complaints, enforce the codes and the ordinances according to Kootenai County Property Maintenance Code, zoning, planning, land use, signs, permits, and obviously site disturbance is a huge issue with that. And I'm very well aware that just before we go to the next slide, Jeff, that site you were talking about, yeah, I remember that. He had put in a permit. I was actually the one when I was notified. We went out and we did a stop work order on it immediately. The big issue behind that and he couldn't continue until he got the best management practices in place and he met all the criteria from the engineering and things like that. Just so you know, as a follow-up, he was actually double feed for that permit as well. So we do have some capability to put a little bit of a sting on some things, plus a notice of violation and all the other things that go along with it. I want to incorporate the slide of what we didn't do, just because we get calls for noxious weeds, road maintenance, all these other different things, and obviously septic and well things. And that's very near and dear to everybody's heart that lives near a water body. And I just put that in there so people knew who to contact if it was one of those issues that they had for complaints. And of course, you guys have weeds in the lake, and that's a whole different entity and an issue as well. In the next slide, I want to actually get straight into site disturbance, because that seems to be, especially lakeside, even any waterway property, it's a huge issue in terms of any construction, because it's got to be looked at for the shoreline management aspect of things. The purpose of it, of course, we want to protect private property. Surface water and groundwater, as you very well know, are very intricate, and it's a resource that we can't abuse and we can't let go without the protections in place. There are some exemptions, and there's some things that I wanted to highlight in blue especially, because people say, well, how much work can I do on some property and what are the restrictions? Because this is a well-known subject by many, especially the ones we come in contact with. A lot of these folks that start excavating say, well, I was just taking about, a little part of that hillside out. It's not a big deal. Well, it is when you look at the slope sides and things like that, and what the adjacent parcels, how it affects them, how it affects runoff down the lake and everything else. And the bottom line is there are some exemptions, but they're fairly minor to what you can do. And lakeside, riverside properties are critical in managing this, because there's not a whole lot you can do in site disturbance without a permit. And there's a couple different types of permits we'll talk about when we get there. Design pro permits or homeowner permits. And generally lakeside properties, because of the steepness of the slopes, are always going to be a design pro, and that's an engineered permit, and it has to be done prior to breaking ground for a residence or anything else that you're going to do. The next slide. These are some of the kind of the normal questions we get called in from us, and I'll go into it later. Obviously, there's some with the exemptions. The big thing is site disturbance. When do you need one? When don't you? Well, unfortunately, it's not a clear-cut instance, because many times we get relayed to us, well, I'm just going to make this little adjustment to my road. And then you go out and they cut half the hillside out, and they needed a site disturbance permit. And I know you all are very familiar with this, and you've probably seen it. So the next slide, basically, for all new driveways, you need a permit, anything, a conversion of a road to another, or construction of structures, any kind of commercial industry, whether it be marina stuff or whatever, you need it. And any kind of excavation that's major, that's not covered under an exemption, which, you know, it's 50 cubic yards is kind of the litmus test. And everybody says, well, what's 50 cubic yards? Well, it's 50, if you could imagine 50 dishwashers full of dirt, that's kind of the given. However, Hayden Lake, Coeur d'Alene Lake, and all the other lakes with steep slopes, well above 10%. So it pretty much is thrown out from there. There was one property that was close to the Neals where he had a fairly large parcel. It was, the grade was fairly limited, but he had a buildup, but less than 1/3 of his land was disturbed. So he met an exemption. Now, right across the street from him, that gentleman's on a hillside, absolutely doesn't need an exemption. He's got to have a site disturbance permit, which he applied for, and he can move a little bit of dirt, but not much, because if he starts cutting it to slope, he's gone over the threshold. So on the next slide, I talked about design professional plans. Those are actual engineered plans where you have to have a certified engineer stamp off on that development of that parcel prior to any construction or anything like that. The homeowner plans, which most likely in your area doesn't apply because of slopes and the things that we've talked about before, that's mainly for a person, say out here on the Rathdrum Prairie, somebody goes out, they're going to move a bunch of dirt excavation more than 50 cubic yards. They need a site disturbance permit. However, to mitigate what they've done to disturb, it's mainly like vegetation. They might have to hydro seed or something like that. And they'll allow homeowner plans and, you know, risk stuff. I will say the planner actually has to go out on site and do an on-site analysis or assessment of each one of those before it even gets into the review process. Because bottom line is our director says, get out on site, see what's there, because sometimes we get plans that aren't always reflecting what's out on the ground, and we want to verify that, especially when it comes to managing and you know, helping with water quality and potential for disastrous effects. Grading, slopes can't exceed 2 to 1. Tops and the toe cuts, they got to be set back from the property lines, and that for obvious reasons, because the main effect there is erosion. Okay, and so how do we control this? You know, we do have a sediment and erosion control area in our regulations, basically on-site stuff. Contractors need to make sure that they have the sufficient BMPs, and that site that you were talking about that we got involved in didn't even match up to it, and he knew it. And anyhow, that's a whole different conversation on the side someday. But you know, we enforce that, and you guys are our eyes and ears, because if something fails, we want to get right up there and make sure that it's corrected on the spot, and then minimize any damage and obviously accountability. Now, I will tell you this. When things do go down to water bodies and things, I get on the horn to IDL, IDWR. We get everybody involved just to make sure that everybody knows if there's a major issue. And then obviously, you know, your highway district guys, they're intimately involved too, because they know if something goes to the lake, they have a reporting responsibility that they have to call. Next slide, please. This is just kind of an example of, you know, what's effective versus what's ineffective. And we've seen it. I know in the years you guys have been out there, you've probably seen it several different times. So I don't even have to show you anything like that. But I just wanted to let you know, silt fences are even though it doesn't look like it does, but it will hold a significant load. Now, the key to that is they've got to be in place properly. A lot of these guys just stake in the plastic and call it good. Well, it's supposed to be dug in 4 inches on the lip side to the face of the hill to be effective. And of course, we'll check that, and we'll stop the project until it's right. The next slide just kind of shows that's a pretty extreme slope, but they put the barrier material down over what's been hydroseeded to hopefully eliminate erosion. You know, that's kind of a bad case scenario, but at least they're taking care of it to the best that they can. The next slide, basically, you know, it's the old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that's true, because if you don't maintain erosion, we basically lost the battle. So if you don't take care of it on the forefront, on the tail end of it, it's going to cost more, it's going to create more damage and more headache, and the recovery of it is cumbersome for everybody. And as I say in sediment control, basically, if we're going down to that point, we've lost the battle for erosion. And that's not a good position to be in for anybody that's managing a water body. So we do have a stormwater chapter in our regulations, which basically is to the 25-year storm event. It states that, you know, they've got to manage the first half inch of the runoff from whatever impervious surface, whether it be asphalt, you know, pavement or whatever, to discharge it over land or ground or to surface waters, so it doesn't, you know, create more of a stormwater issue for the water bodies that it's near or close to. And that next slide, obviously, it's just kind of a picture, but we've seen those as we've gone along, some of the unimproved roads, and we know what erosion does, and it creates havoc on the environment and obviously dramatic effects on roadways. And I was dealing with this one off of, it's close to the Coeur d'Alene Lake, and a retaining wall failed. The whole road structure underneath, because of the steep slope, and it wasn't engineered properly, well, it was engineered properly, it wasn't installed properly, it basically sunk in underneath, and that road was on the verge of collapse. So it's really important to deal with stormwater control and runoff. Now, shoreline management areas, that's something that affects all the water bodies. You know, it exists along all the streams as well as the shoreline management area of all the lakes, and that's at distance of 25 feet from the slope inland. You know, the ordinary high water mark. And I know you guys' ordinary high water marks at the elevation of 2242.9. So, and it's different. And the importance of knowing that is who's involved in terms of the jurisdiction. Anything at the ordinary high and above, it's the county. Anything below that, it's Idaho Department of Lands, can be IDWR in certain circumstances, and obviously Army Corps of the Engineers. But that's just one of those important buffers. And we had a comment towards the end of one of the questions. I'll address that a little later on. And the whole purpose of the buffers is to maintain the water quality. And obviously you want to reduce the nutrients running in the waterways, the environmental protection for the fish and wildlife, erosion, and, you know, obviously there's some drinking water issues as well. The protection buffers are pretty simple for Kootenai County and most of the state, but we just have a class 1 stream. It's on the next slide. It's 75 feet. Class 1 streams are defined as fish-bearing streams. Class 2, they can have some domestic water, basically resourcing and things like that. That's why it's a 30 foot. And shoreline, don't ask me why it's 25. Maybe it's a steep cut, but that's what they've settled on. I know up at Ponderay, I think it's 60 in some places. And of course, the rivers of the Spokane and Coeur d'Alene rivers, it's applicable to them as well. And the next slide kind of shows the measurement, how they do it, and how it's required by code and the slope distance. Okay, and then the stream buffer restrictions. You know, there's some things that you can do, like you can have a 4-foot wide stairwell and a 6x6 landing on a tram. There's some seasonal work that you can do, repair, those kinds of things. You know, existing sites for replacements or alterations. And they do have some development exemptions, which I'll go into a little bit later on. The restrictions. Now, this is one I really want to, and this was a question on number 30 that Christine Bartz submitted, in terms of what can you put within the shoreline management area? Well, honestly, not a bunch. Basically, it's temporary stuff that you can remove fairly easily. And she's got a point about people, you know, putting in these permanent pavers and a bunch of other things. But basically, you can just do stairways, walkways, landings, barbecue areas, seating areas. Some have fire pits, those kinds of things. That's okay. But any major type of development, whether you're going to put concrete, something like, it's just simply not allowed. Structures aren't allowed. I know there's gazebos out there. People are putting decks out there. It is not allowed. Now, that doesn't include the landings going down to the deck that IDL permit. That's a different issue. Okay, so the exception 1, mechanical ground disturbance for allowed uses. Well, what is that? This is the definition of what it is. And as you can see, it is very subjective. You know, they basically look at the risk to the water quality, if it's less or equal to the risk if the work were performed by hand. So pretty minimal projects, I guess, is the bottom line on that for guidance. And the next exemption 2, obviously, like I talked about earlier, It's a repair, the replacement of, say you've got a stairwell landing going down, you got a few bad boards and things like that. That's not a big issue to actually repair. If you're going to replace the whole thing, that's another story. If you're going to use major equipment to get down there, that's another story as well. And agency jurisdictions obviously would have to, you weigh in, IDL weigh in, we would weigh in, any other agency that would need to, because of the erosion and any potential structural integrity issues, you might have to even get a building permit for it, depending on the work that's going to be done. And the next slide shows kind of the pictures of the left and right, and that's pretty obvious as what types of issues those people are facing on the left and the right. You got a bad seawall on the right. Obviously, it needs to get replaced. And that's what the exemptions are in place for. Now, it doesn't mean that somebody's going to sit there and excavate, increase their shoreline by 10 feet, put up another seawall, that kind of thing. That's just simply not allowed. It's not permitted anyhow. I want to go into the building code, just a couple things. That's going to change here in the 2018 when we adopted. You'll see a bunch of different dates between 12s and 15s, and the reason for that is when they adopted code, they looked at what would be most beneficial, and some of the ones that they stayed with 2012 versus going to 2015 were because the energy code, it was felt too restrictive, so they didn't adopt it. The 2018 code's been written so that it's more adaptable to Idaho conditions, and it's a better written code, so it's incorporated some of the 15 and 12 stuff, and they've come up with a pretty good deal. They'll look at that probably around January, implementing something new. That's just a heads up. The next thing in terms of the major provisions of the building code, and this is a big slide, the bottom line is if somebody's building something over there, and I'll go through some requirements, they need a permit. They need it inspected, they need a final inspection, and obviously they need, if it's going to be livable or habitable space, finalize the permit so they get a certificate of occupancy. And that's the big thing. Now, I tell you something on that too, is a lot of folks have mechanical permits and they call them out. They're like heater goes bad, air conditioner goes bad. What we're seeing a real issue with is those permits wind up expiring. The contractor comes out, does work, they don't call for a final inspection. Next thing our building department does is send it over to us for the enforcement division, say, hey, these are expired permits. We contact the owner, and the owner's like, well, we paid this company to do it. They didn't final it, and it wasn't finalized. And so that's one of the things. If all your folks, anybody has any of that work done, make sure they get notification of the final inspection, because contractors are busy. They just take off, and it's not something that's on their radar when they leave the premise. These are some of the things. This is what's important for especially lakeshore properties. Exemptions for permits. Some folks will fences. You don't have to do it. You might have a personal storage building that's not exceeding 200 square feet. You're good to go there. Retaining walls are huge, as you all well know. Now, the way the permit requirement is for retaining walls, it's up to 4 feet, but that's from the base of the footing. That could be 6 feet down. Okay, so you're good on a 4-foot retaining wall, but as we both know, and all of us know, that the retaining walls are usually on sloped area, and they have a surge charge or fill behind them. If there's a 1-foot fill, they definitely need to have a permit for that, because it's got to be engineered. All the other stuff's pretty general. Decks. That's a big thing. 200 square feet is the limit. Anything above that, you need a permit. Or if you attach it to like any other point of a house or something like that, or it's above 30 inches above grade, which most of them are, permits required. Just want to put it out there for an educational thing. Christine asked if we had some statistics on, especially for Hayden Lake and some of the actions and things like that. There was no way that I could actually pull Hayden Lake's statistics specifically in our data system that we have right now. We've actually gone out for development. We're looking at replacing it. It's 12 years old. It's an old legacy system. We want to be able to get better statistics, especially shoreline management activity. The way our enforcement actions work, still it's on a complaint basis. We have to have a signed complaint. We get the complaint, we go out, we do a site visit, we look at it, we assess it according to the county code, and we'll do either a warning notice, but in most site disturbance issues, it's a notice of violation right away. If it's something they're doing without a permit, we go out and we will stop the work and then issue a notice of violation. Then they've got to come in, and compliance got to go to the county, get it reviewed, and probably our only bite on it is double fee in them, and then we record the violation against the property. So if at a later time and date that they don't comply and they go to sell or something, it's like having a lien against their property. Now, on very serious concerns as site disturbances or building issues where it's life safety, we actually go to the Board of County Commissioners for an injunction. We can go to the courts, get a court order, and then it goes a whole different level. But that's the bottom line that we do. Right now, there's 2 of us. We're at the capacity of our code violations, reported code violations, as where we were last year at the end of December. So with what the deputy was saying, the influx, so we've definitely seen a lot of uptick in some of those things as well. And, you know, it's a trend, and there's some attitudinal issues for educational purposes that are obviously open because and Jeff, I'm just going to tell you, just like you said, it's the attitude, well, I'm going to see how far I can stretch this, you know, before I get caught kind of thing. And we see a lot of that attitude. However, it is starting to change because some folks are getting double feed and we are catching it. And the nice thing is the residents care. And they're calling us and saying, hey, this is going on. Can they be doing this? So information flow is getting much better. Again, though, we do have to have a signed complaint to be able to act on, and that's where we're at with that. So subject to any questions or comments, I thank you for this time, and you know, we'll continue to work as diligently as we can.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Craig. And we'll see if there are questions at the end.
Okay.
The other issue, we have Jeremy Varley from the Department of Agriculture. He deals with the invasive species. The big issue on Hayden Lake, of course, is the invasive species. They've done a lot of work, and they've had a fair amount of success this year, so much success that it's reported that a lot of boating is occurring, we're seeing a lot more boating occurring in the North Arm now that the weeds have been taken out of there than we've seen in years past. So, Jeremy, you want to take it from there?
Sure, I'll be happy to take it. Yep. I'll just go ahead and share my screen here. And
Yeah, I think you can share.
Okay. There you go, Jeremy.
Excellent. Okay. So thank you for that lead-in, Jeff. I really appreciate that. We have been doing a lot of work on Hayden Lake, and we're finally starting to see some of that starting to pay off just a little bit. And I've appreciated all of the input and everybody's time that they've taken to pull me aside at the various meetings and tell me the history of their history with Hayden Lake and what they've seen with the invasive weed situation on Hayden Lake. So what I'm going to try to do tonight is just try to keep it very short and go through this really quick and just kind of really talk about what's been going on this year in Hayden Lake, because as I'm sure everybody's aware, it's been a unique year, and that's created some unique challenges for us in a working environment as a state agency to continue to be able to provide the necessary service that you guys need. Just because we all stopped going out doesn't mean that the weeds stopped growing and took a break. So it was our turn to really sit down and take a closer look at what's going on. So I'm just going to do a quick recap of what's happened already this year and what's upcoming here before the end of this 2020 season. So first and foremost, as you heard Jeff describe earlier in his State of the Lake address, we know the North Arm is a problem area. As you heard him describe the nutrients that are available there that are great for not only algal blooms, but also for plant growth. We've had two main species that have been the main repeat offenders in that North Arm area, which has been curlyleaf pondweed and Eurasian water milfoil. Curlyleaf pondweed comes up thick and heavy in the spring, and fills the lake. And then as soon as it starts to drop off in July, that's when the Eurasian water milfoil would then come up and then take its turn in the sun until early September. So we've kind of changed our practice on how we're doing treatments in that northern arm, just trying to do more to pull these invasive plants out while trying to keep as many of the native species in that area as possible, because that's what's going to help keep help outcompete those invasives from coming back and reestablishing if we have a healthy native plant community. So in 2019, we started this with the first Eurasian water milfoil and curlyleaf pondweed targeted treatment. It was a series of 3 treatments over the course, starting about April and May, June, and July. We had 3 consecutive fluoridone treatments, and then we've got a lot of feedback on that. First and foremost being that we didn't quite slow down the curlyleaf enough, where it still reached the top of the surface of the water, and then we then had some follow-up issues, but then we never saw any milfoil come up later that same season. So then we started to notice there was something going on that was helping us get rid of this curlyleaf pondweed. And then this year we did do a spring treatment. We switched chemistries to a 1 application method rather than having 3 consecutive treatments, which means 3 different restriction periods for water use and things of that nature. We want to try to be a little bit more understanding of the use of the water up there, not only for recreation, but for drinking water and irrigation as well. So we switched to the Gallium SC or Panoxylum herbicide this year and had 1 treatment there. And I'll just kind of give some quick background information on that. Our main, if you don't know what curlyleaf pondweed is, welcome to the lake. It's curlyleaf pondweed's been a repeat offender. The main things that you see with curlyleaf pondweed is these very, very tight, wavy leaves. And then they're very, very thin. They stay pretty much the same size all the way out from the stem, all the way out to their tip. We do have a native plant that's very, very visible right now in the north arm of the lake that has waves in its leaves. They're not as tight as these ones are on the curlyleaf. However, they do have a wave in them. The other thing is these are anywhere from a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch wide. The native big leaf pondweed can be 2-3 inches wide on those wavy leaves. And you will see that out in the lake, and it is out there. It does grow in good stands because there's plenty of nutrients for them to grow, but they're helping to keep these invasives out. The other structure that we really focus on is these little pine cone-like structures on these curlyleaf pondweeds. This is known as a turion. Basically, think of it, this is what we're fighting. So, next slide here. What we did last fall was we went out to see where is the turion count the highest in the water. And this is just a graphic kind of showing where's those areas of highest content of curlyleaf turions.
Do you want to ask him?
I think he just crashed.
Am I crashing here?
Yeah, you're crashing, Jeremy.
I'm sorry.
There we go.
I've got kids sharing the internet, so I've just kicked them off. I apologize. So, anyway, so this is just a quick graphic of where those turions are heaviest in the north arm of the lake that we've been fighting. And so this is this year's curlyleaf pondweed treatment. This is about 269 acres of treatment area where we found that the curlyleaf to be growing actively. And you'll notice it's a little bit less than the 2019 treatment area, which was about 300 acres, because we were trying to kind of keep this attack going to where is the curlyleaf going, because if it's not there, we don't want to apply more herbicide to an area where we don't want to stress the native plants anymore. So we did monitor this treatment this year. We've been up a couple different times. These are from 35 days after treatment, where you can see the tissue is definitely necrotic. It's more brown than that vibrant green that you normally see with a curly-leaf pondweed. This is just a dying plant. The thing that we really liked that we saw was the turions weren't happy. If you look at these upper two on my hand in the lower left, they are small, deformed in comparison to the control, which was from a different area, which was a lot bigger, and for that time of year, it was nice to see that impact on the turions, which is what we're targeting. This is going to be a continued effort for controlling curly-leaf in the North Arm. We have a lot of turions in that lake bed that we've got to kind of think of it like a seed bank. It's going to be something we're going to be fighting for a while. So we're trying to remove them. The main ideology behind how we're doing this is we're trying to hit the target area in the spring before we hit the turion production, so we can impact that plant there so we don't have more turions being produced and put into that seed bank. Right now we're in year 2. We're hopeful that by year 3, we're going to see a great reduction in the amount of turions that are going to be present in that lake bed, and far fewer curly-leaf pondweeds in the system. That's our goal, because it's going to be it's not a species that we can eradicate, but we can get it down to a controllable level where it's not going to be creating those giant mats of floating plants that are incredibly thick and causing a lot of problems for people on the north end. I'm not talking about the native species. It's just, again, this is that curly-leaf pondweed that we're fighting. One last thing I want to touch on that I think is important for you guys to know, and I'm happy to report on. So this is the 2019 in August when we did all the Eurasian water milfoil. If we detect any Eurasian water milfoil in our surveys last year, we made a treatment area out of it because we had a new Kootenai. The results as of not quite 1 year post-treatment, you can see on this graphic here is the red dots, I know they're very, very small, were where we found single plants in some of those previous treatment areas. But for the most part, everywhere else that we looked for it, we could not find it. And we waited until the middle of July to do this survey to make sure that we could fully understand what was going on in this picture here, and be able to say that there was no milfoil growing in our treatment areas from the last year. That's fantastic news to share. We finally have a tool that helps keep it out for more than just one growing season. So we're very encouraged by that. We were very skeptical because Hayden Lake has a high number of the hybrid milfoils that aren't as susceptible to herbicide treatments. So to see only a few plants cropping up in some of those smaller treatment areas, we kind of expected to see that because this herbicide is not designed to be used in anything less than the half-acre treatment area. So that made us it encouraged us quite a bit to see these kind of results 1 year after treatment. So moving on, for this year, for the remaining part of the season, we did at the same time that we were reviewing last year's treatments, we were also conducting a lake-wide survey to find out where the Eurasian water milfoil was growing outside of our treatment areas, to start planning for what we were going to do about Eurasian water milfoil. Excuse me. Excuse me. This year. So we did do some mapping and surveying, and we did find about 26 acres that's going to need treatment. Now that's a very small amount of acres in comparison to the past, but we are very encouraged by that. We do have notices have gone out both for the registered water rights users as well as some of the dockside or the resident postings that our contractor has done. In addition to these herbicide treatments, we found some areas that they don't really require a herbicide treatment. They're of a density that's low enough that to do a herbicide treatment would just be putting additional chemical in the water that's not really needed. So we do have some areas that we're going to assign some divers to, about 38 acres of treatment area for them. And then we are going to repeat our fall turion study again this fall to assess how many turions, to make sure that we're still going on that downward trend for the amount of curly leaf pondweed seeds that are in that lake bed. So just a quick couple of maps here for you. These are the treatment areas for this season, for 2020. These are the ones that will be treated on August 24th is kind of the day that we've penciled in for right now. We did say out on the notice that we'll be doing it between the 20th and the 25th. But you know, depending upon what the weather does, we could be on either side of that. But for right now, we've penciled in for that Monday, the 24th, to be the date of treatment for Hayden Lake. And as you notice, it's mostly on that would-be eastern side of the lake where we had some of that milfoil cropping up. And every single one of these is outside of one of last year's treatment areas. So we are looking forward to getting in the water and getting those treated. This is the notification area of where notifications were sent out. We're required by the permit to send out, but for a permit for certain herbicides, we're required to notify for a quarter mile. We take that as every herbicide that we utilize, we notify residents within a quarter mile of those treatment areas. Now, one issue that has continually come up with these notifications is in the language of the permit, it requires us to go to the Idaho Department of Water Resources, where everybody registers their water rights to be able to utilize the water from the lake. Sometimes that address does not get updated. And when that address does not get updated, those notices don't make it to you. So if you've ever been in the boat of, I was never notified of a treatment until someone put something on my dock that said treatment was coming, you know, the next day, I don't appreciate that. Well, sometimes we've made a lot of effort to try and get notifications out in a timely manner for everybody. So, because we realize that with herbicide treatments, there comes water restrictions. There comes things that we have to be able to, you know, help you plan for. And so if you haven't taken the opportunity to double check your address with the Idaho Department of Water Resources, please do so. Because some of the addresses are still listed as the rural route numbers and not the current, you know, street numbers. So please, if you have an opportunity to, please take the time to double check those. Now, when it comes to the treatment areas for these, if you're within this notification area, we usually encourage everybody to follow those water restrictions. And with the herbicide that we're utilizing this summer, it's Procellacor again. The only restriction is for irrigation of broadleaf type plants or food crops. If you're just watering grass, there is no restrictions for irrigation. However, if you're watering a garden, watering flowers, flower pots, things of that nature, don't use the lake water for 3 days after application. So if we're treating on Monday, then Thursday you'll be open and ready to go to water to your heart's content. This herbicide moves out of the system very rapidly. We still will do a follow-up water treatment monitor, water residue monitoring to make sure that all that herbicide has moved out of the system at 3 days post. Last year we did this with all those other treatment areas, and all of it came back as a no detect. So we expect that same type of behavior this year as well. But so the general consensus is that 3 days you're clear to water, and it's stated as such on the label. This is a quick snapshot of the diver areas of where the divers will be working. We had some very small areas where the plant densities were too low for a treatment area, with the exception of the Gem Shores area. This area here, we have an agreement with the Kootenai County or Kootenai Water. That's a public drinking water system. They've requested that we don't do a treatment in their bay, so we send the divers down there. It's a pretty steep shelf, so there's not a lot of milfoil in there anyway. So we just figured during peak draw for that public water system, we wanted to make sure that they could continue to use that without having to worry about our herbicide treatments. This is just a quick snapshot of what the fall Turion survey is going to look like. This is a repeat from last year. We basically send down a pretty heavy dredge, a little clamshell dredge, down to the lake bed in the fall after all the plants start to senesce, to then get in that top layer of sediment to see how many Turions are present. And then we'll report that data as we find it in the fall. And that'll kind of help us determine, like I said, are we on track for lowering that number of curlyleaf pondweed turions in the water system and having less and less presence of curlyleaf pondweed, which is what we want to track towards. And this kind of is just that way of being able for us to quantify just how good of a job we're doing or how bad of a job we're doing. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Okay, first, Will, do we have questions? And
Yeah, I do have one for Jeremy right now. And have you can go ahead and switch back to me, Jeremy.
I'm working on it.
Okay. So I guess the question, Jeremy, was could you explain what the hybrid milfoil is and how extensive it is?
Absolutely. So when Eurasian water milfoil is introduced into, in this case, Hayden Lake, there was all a presence of the native northern milfoil. Did I drop out?
Mm-hmm.
We can hear you.
I can see you.
Frozen.
Okay. Sorry about that.
okay.
Okay.
Was it recording when Jeremy was host?
Yeah, it was.
There we go.
Okay.
Sir, there we go. I'm back now. So in regards to the hybrid milfoil, it's basically a combination of our native northern milfoil and the invasive Eurasian water milfoil. When those two have cross-pollinated, if you will, and combined, they've taken certain attributes of the invasive and certain attributes of the northern. And what we've typically seen has been it takes the hardiness of the northern milfoil and the quick spreading of the Eurasian water milfoil. Mm-hmm. And when it does that, it changes enough of the chemistry of the plant that certain targeted systemic herbicides will not work as well on the hybrid milfoil as it does on what's known as a true Eurasian. So it's created a lot of problems, and Hayden Lake has been the case study for hybrid milfoils for a number of years. There's been a lot of studies that have gone in Hayden specifically. I think it's been documented that there's probably 7+ different varieties of the hybrid milfoil. So it's a difficult one to fight. But what we've been encouraged by is seeing control on both the Eurasian as well as control on the hybrid milfoils, which has been very encouraging to see with these Procelliflor treatments.
Okay. We have one more question. We have another question for you here, Jeremy. Can homeowners coordinate to have your divers removed from our dock area? And that would be increasing the scope, but the homeowner pays the additional cost. If not, can you provide the name of the diver?
So the name of our diver is a statewide contract. It's Matt Lawrence, and his name of his company is Aquatic Weed Solutions. He's based there out of Coeur d'Alene. And when he's on our contract, it's very, very stringent that we prescribe a specific area. They go work that specific area, and then once they're done with us, they're off on their own. So if you wanted to utilize him to remove any other vegetation, because when he's working for us, we are very specific in saying, this is the species that you're targeting. We want you to remove this and nothing else. I swam in Hayden Lake, and anything that touches your leg feels like seaweed, and you don't like it. And I understand why you clean around your dock, and so that's a few more species. But when he's on our operations, we're very specific on our contract on how he performs his work. So unfortunately, I can't increase that scope to have him do around the docks. But if you want to utilize him, he will be in that area, and please feel free to do so. He just probably won't stop while he's working on our projects. He's pretty tight on that. So
Okay. Nothing more for you at the moment, Jeremy.
Excellent.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Jeremy.
Thank you.
Well, did we have any other questions that came in on the chat?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
Okay.
And this would be for Justin. I think Will actually joined us. I'm not as sure if he's still with us or not. But now, can you, we'd like for you to describe a scenario for getting on the lake with your boat from another lake versus what it's like to get on the lake from another lake if they have a boat housed there on the lake.
Not quite sure what that question is asking. Are you asking how busy it is at the launches, or if it's easier to get on the lake if you already have your boat on the lake because it's easier?
Yeah, maybe more the question, let's see. What are the, well, let me rephrase it this way. What are the ramifications of not having a sheriff's boat housed on Hayden Lake? I.e., what is the sequence of events that ensues when there is a serious accident on Hayden Lake and the Marine Patrol is on Spirit Lake?
Yeah, I understand. Okay, so you're asking more specific to us and law enforcement launching as opposed to having one on the lake. In fact, this issue has been brought up a couple times, and in fact, we're currently trying to put a boat permanently on Hayden Lake, and we just haven't come up with a solution that either works for any of the marinas or the sheriff's office. But I think the issue that they're asking is how long does it take us to launch a boat to respond to an incident, whereas if we have a boat on the lake, we can launch. So the process once the boat is on the water, as opposed to launching and getting it on the water, same setup as far as getting the boat started and leaving. So the time saver is, one, depending on the time of day, is essentially the travel time is increased anytime we have to tow a boat. I don't know if you've ever noticed when cops drive with their lights on, they kind of go pretty fast. It's kind of one of the things that we do. But when we're traveling with a boat behind us, I do not let my guys go very fast because you just can't. You've got too much weight behind you. We can't travel very fast. So that does take more time. And then launching a vessel at any boat ramp can be stressful. Try doing that when there's people that are in danger and or need your help and the situation is just stressful enough. Launching a vessel can be very difficult, especially for some of my guys that haven't done it as many times as others. So that can take time. So one of the things that we've looked at trying to do is putting a permanent boathouse and or boat slip somewhere where we could keep a boat on Hayden Lake to limit our response time for emergencies, but really our ability to patrol the lake, because right now, the only place that we truly launch at is Honeysuckle. We've got a law enforcement parking space there. And if you've been to Honeysuckle at all during the summer, it's just chaotic. And just because we're law enforcement doesn't mean we get to cut the line and just, unless it's an emergency, we kind of wait. So a lot of our shift is waiting to launch the boat and then loading the boat back up. And so there is a lot of downtime just because of the business of those launches. So that is something that I know my administration have looked at. We've talked to the Hayden Lake Country Club and possibly putting one at their marina, and that hasn't gone anywhere. We've talked to the city of Hayden, and Honeysuckle Boat Launch just doesn't really have the area, essentially the surface area, to build one out there. And they've also looked over putting one. I don't remember. There was another entity that we looked at putting one in, and it just hasn't taken fruition yet. So we'll see. It is something that we would love to do because Hayden Lake is big enough and it is busy enough to keep a boat on there full time, and it would increase our ability to patrol and respond to incidences quicker. But that is something that's still kind of a dream at this point.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions. So Jeff, would you like to open it up to the folks that are participating tonight?
Yes, that's fine. Let's open it up. I did have one comment. Maybe boat moorage on the lake is something the association, the district could put their head together. Sounds to me like would be an improvement for everybody.
If you're talking about some moorage for law enforcement, we're open to any ideas. In fact, our 4 boats that we moor on Coeur d'Alene, and then we moor another 2 on Spokane River. I mean, we understand that the businesses that we moor at, you know, they're a business, so we still pay moorage fees just like anywhere else. I don't know exactly what those rates are, but so we're not opposed to even paying a moorage fee within reason. We do have some security reasons that we have to build a house, so to speak, so that the boats are protected and they can't be tampered with when we're not on the water. And that's kind of what has been the inhibitor so far. But we're open to suggestions. If anyone wants to donate, you know, their own personal dock, we'll be happy to use it.
Okay, any questions for any of the speakers?
Question.
Yeah, Steve?
This is for Craig. In describing the Shoreline 25-foot management process, you explained that you have to have a signed complaint. Would you elaborate a little bit on the origin of that? Is that in ordinance or is that policy? The end point I'm headed toward here is if you see it and it's illegal, why do you force neighbors to get mad at each other over signing complaints? Because I'm sure that intimidates the process.
Understand, and it is a policy thing. It's come down, it's been several years in the making, and you know, I don't necessarily agree, but it's just the way we have to do business right now. However, they've lightened the restriction on us to a certain degree. If we see something, if we're out of the property and we see something in the course of doing our business, then we can take that to task on our own. Now, we do a lot of things internally too with building inspectors. They refer over to us. It's policy right now, Stephen. I can't get around it. The other issue that everybody needs to know is we don't have a right of entry on the property. So we actually, in order to see the violations, we depend upon the complainant or the neighbors to be able to show us from their property. Unlike, you know, an emergency situation, law enforcement has a legal right to go there. In our realm of what we do for enforcement purposes, if we did something like that, they can press criminal trespass charges against us. In our code, it's written for like planners and inspectors. They have a right of entry for inspection purposes. Because we're on the enforcement end, we don't have that same legal authority. So we're on a pretty tight rope as far as that goes. Just so you know, I'm trying to work something in the process with complainants. If a required signature from a complainant has to be within the record, if there was a public records request, my concern is to be able to redact who it was other than what the complaint was to protect that person from retaliation or retribution. It hasn't been accepted yet, but I'm working that direction.
Yeah.
So the policy of requiring that made by David, or is that made by the county commissioners?
I believe it came from a commission ago, and it's still standard throughout there. David has been working pretty diligently to relax some of that for obvious purposes. It's just, we haven't made much ground. I think we're going to see some changes upcoming this year. Just don't know what it's going to be. Like I said, if they won't sign complaints, it's just kind of like, you know, you have the right to basically confront your accuser, and that's kind of the same preference here, although this isn't a criminal issue, it's a civil issue for the most part. So that's why I think my platform, as far as trying to protect the complainant with redacting that information regarding who it was, other than what the actual complaint was, because really doesn't matter who complained. We care about the violation and validating the violation, not who said something.
Mm-hmm.
So let's keep going on that topic a little bit.
Okay.
Are you saying that it's a policy of the commissioners, or is it in the Kootenai County ordinance structure?
No, it's not in the ordinance. It just, they require a signed complaint.
So as we work on trying to make enforcement more effective,
Mm-hmm.
and the association is going to work on complaints about boats,
Mm-hmm.
is it correct that we can discuss with the commissioners simply changing the policy?
Absolutely, that would be beneficial. And the way I would do it for probably a greater amount of recommended success would be just that, say, okay, I get you want to know who get a signed complaint, but in the issue of somebody requesting public records to redact who the complainant was, because really that doesn't matter other than the fact that we care about what the complaint was and it was validated. And that's the investigative part of it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Well, it does, but I would like to get to a point where you're not constrained in your enforcement efforts, you're encouraged in your enforcement efforts.
Right. No,
Access to a boat, there's a lot of places where if you can't go on private property, being able to enforce the shoreline disturbance and both the disturbance ordinance and the 25-foot setback ordinance is impossible. So we are expecting from you, or the public is expecting from you, a task for which you don't have the tools. And that's what I'm trying to get at here is, what do we have to do to empower you or your colleagues to be able to go onto property and find illegal activity, and if it's wrong, cite those people.
right.
The current system, my view at least, is it just doesn't work.
Yeah, it's difficult.
People whack all the green material off the shoreline and no consequences.
Right. No,
And so it's no offense to you, but it's just not very effective. We haven't given you the tools to make this work.
right. No, I understand that. But we do find a workaround, and my partner nor I are not afraid. We're not afraid at all of knocking on somebody's door and saying, hey, this has been reported. Do you care if we walk in your backyard and take a look at your neighbor or what have you? And we get some cooperation that way. And then sometimes the people that it was complained against will say, I didn't know it was wrong. Could you come on and show me? Absolutely. And those are the ones we really like working with because we can get pretty quick resolution.
Great. Thanks for the explanation.
There was another question, but I lost track of where that other question was. No, someone.
I have a question for Jeremy, but I don't know if we're ready to move to a different topic.
Yeah, go ahead. No,
Okay.
go ahead, Marianne.
But before we move to that other topic, I wanted to note that that you said that a signed complaint is required, but I have heard that the process for issuing a complaint is difficult. Like a phone call isn't good enough. So maybe you could elucidate the process of issuing a complaint.
Yeah, we do have a complaint form. You can get it on, it's on our web, or we've emailed them out or what have you. I've actually taken email complaints because email is charged as considered official correspondence. So if somebody gives me that information, I'll act on it.
Okay, so the signature, pen on paper, is not the kind of signage. Digital signature is sufficient.
Right, and sometimes people, they may not be as literate on some of the form, even though they're PDF fillable. If they send that in on an email with their contact information, it's legitimate as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, all righty, thank you. Awesome, excellent.
Sure.
Jeremy, I have a question. You had, I'm looking at the water rights notice. So the notice that was sent to the water rights holders, and you had said that the irrigation restrictions are lifted 3 days after the application. And the notice reads that the restrictions are in place until a residue sample shows less than 2 parts per billion. So I realize that by 3 days you expect that the residue sample will be below the threshold. But can you please clarify what lifts the restriction?
Yes. So what lifts the restriction? So first we have we always go with the tightest restriction. Now on the label, it says for applications of the size that we are doing on Hayden Lake, it's 3 days for watering of food crops and broadleaves. It doesn't mention anything about doing a fast test or getting that, parts per billion level in there. When we did this last year at 3 days post, we processed those same day. So we do the samples early in the morning, get those to the lab so we have results by 5 o'clock that day on the third day. And all of those last year were no detect. The same thing happened with Bear Lake this year that we treated earlier this year with Procellacor in mid-July. We treated down in Bear Lake, and same thing, they were a no detect. So we've gained some confidence in that labeling structure in there, and we say 2 parts per billion because we are going to do that test. We are going to release those results to say, yep, they're below that, that 2 part per billion threshold. And those are for, you'll see that in the labeling structure of saying, for food and agricultural crops with a larger treatment area than what we are having, they require that fast test, and it has to be below 2 parts per billion for it to be safe to be put on those crops. It looks like I just cut. Sorry.
Well, your voice always stays there. So it's okay. It's okay. So I don't need to change the information on our webpage where I have said that it's lifted when it's 2 parts per billion.
That's okay.
You're going to use a test to confirm that at 3 days it has reached its appropriate limit. Thank you, Jeremy.
Okay, other questions? I had a question for Todd. Todd, are you there? It says you're there, Todd.
Will, maybe you want to unmute Todd?
Todd, your microphone is muted. Guess you can't hear that.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask Todd, I know the answer to this question, why the hang up on the buoys? And as I understand it, the district was advised by, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, the district was advised by the state to use eco blocks. And after they had the design, going to put in eco blocks to more of the buoys, they found out those would roll right down the slope of the lake. And so they had to get new blocks with edges that would basically hold the buoy. It doesn't do any good if the buoy isn't at 200 feet.
The general story is right, but the missing details. The specification of half an ecology block came from Nick Snyder at County Parks and Waterways. And he was pretty particular about a specification for the anchoring system because he wanted it to be relatively permanent, and of course we do too. Then it was explained to us by Tommy Fry that on some of these sites, the shoreline or the under the water is steep, and so as you described, the eco blocks are roughly 2 feet cubes, just roll down the hill. Much, I guess, to my chagrin, when we explored a solution, which is a flat anchor about 1 foot thick and 4x4, which will not roll, I went back and was told that, oh yes, well, the county uses those frequently too. So we were just unfortunately not well enough informed. And this whole process, I'm sorry to report, but I do want to tell you, suffered from this is the first time that anybody on our team has been through this, and so we had to fix some problems that might not have happened if we were doing it for the 5th time or even the 2nd time. Finding a source for the flat ones was a little difficult. They're being made by Wilbert Ball for us in Spokane. And we have stainless steel connectors on them so they don't rust. And so there's a bunch of things that have gone into this process. And the district team, which has been led by Leo Notar and Todd Walker, has done a good job at reacting to the obstacles as they come along. And I wish that we would have this done earlier. Took a long time to get the county commissioners to back off of the limitation of 8 and go to 14. But we got that accomplished, and so now we will have at least 14 and the promise of more. I want to emphasize that the feedback that you can encourage your neighbors to provide through the association webpage complaint panel that Will is going to produce, I think is going to be pivotal in getting a change to more buoys. And most important, I would suggest, if we can put it out on both the association webpage and the district webpage, ask people to swivel around and grab your smartphone and take a picture of the boat that's coming next to your dock. I don't know that that's a useful enforcement technique, but if we have the courage to publish the pictures, I think it'll be a substantial improvement in education and, frankly, self-monitoring. Nobody wants to run their wake boat, their $150,000 wake boat, and get it pictured on the web page as violating the 300-foot rule. So I think there's some community pressures we can apply here, which might have some promise.
I think Todd is unmuted now, if Todd wanted to.
Yeah, I am. Yep, I am. And Steve, you did a good job of explaining what happened in the process. And that's exactly, and they'll be coming on Tuesday morning to the country club to be put out.
And for those of you who don't know who Todd Walker is, he's our lake manager. So
Todd
And
gets,
most of you have my number and can give me a call anytime if you have any questions. Yeah, it's on the web. My
Todd
number.
gets the credit for assembling the buoys. They come in parts, and all the connecting stuff has to be assembled, and Todd's the one who screwed the lights onto the top and so forth. That's all done now and ready to go. We owe some appreciation to Merlin at Marks Marine for giving us some of his warehouse space to assemble these products. We bought them from him, but he didn't bargain, I suspect, to let us put them together there, and Todd did that. So they're ready to go as soon as we have the anchors.
Yes, they are.
Other questions?
I
I
want to.
have.
Go ahead, Todd.
Oh, I was gonna say, I don't think Merlin from Marks Marine is on, and he really had talked to me about talking to Jeremy, and he has he's got a camera that goes from his boat, shows some of the milfoil that's around his area, and I'll try to get him to contact Jeremy or something. We'll get you together because he had some concerns.
Yeah. Actually, Merlin's is on tonight.
Oh, is he? Oh, is he? Okay.
It's not unmuted.
Muted right now.
Yeah, we'll just ask him to unmute. We'll see.
Down in the lower left corner, there's a little microphone with a red stroke through it. Merlin, if you're there and can see it.
Well, if he got off, I'll get him connected up with Jeremy somehow.
I have a question for Justin, please. Justin, I know that you guys are doing a lot of education, and that 300-foot distance, I know I've tried to usually stand there and say, how far is 300 feet from the end of the dock? Can't do it yet. How are you teaching people where the 300-foot mark is, or how are you coaching them to self-teach that distance?
That's probably the hardest part about explaining to someone what the distance is, or what the new law says is the 300 feet, because it's very difficult to gauge distance, especially from the water side, when you don't have incremental things to mark that distance. And so on land, if you're in the woods, you've got trees, and so you can guesstimate distances. But in the water, where you don't have those pillars to base it off of, it is difficult. So what we tell people is just go out towards the middle. if you're going to come in close to shore, we don't recommend doing it in a recreational sense, as far as don't surf next to shore. Be respectful of the property owners and surf out towards the middle. So I don't try to help them gauge 300 feet. When we stop them, I will tell them what we're at, and usually it's within that 300 feet or even the 200 feet, and say, look, you may think this is 200 feet, but this is actually 75 feet, or whatever the situation may be. So I may tell them where we're at right then, what that distance is. But when they're asking, or when we're educating them on where they should be wake surfing, we just tell them towards the middle of the lake or river or wherever we're at, because it's too difficult to go, well, you're about 20 feet off, so you just need to go out a little bit further, because they're not going to be able to figure that out. So really our education is, it is 300 feet. You need to be more towards the middle. You're obviously too close now, which is why we're stopping you.
So Justin, my husband thinks the best way to tell people what 300 feet is to imagine a football field. A football field is 300 feet.
Yep, and you're absolutely right. It's just, it's hard to gauge that, because a lot of people, they don't have a good perception of distance.
Right.
Even when I'm training my new guys, every spring we do, some distance, measuring and trying to show them, hey, this is what we have instruments on the boat that will gauge that for us, within reason, but it's still, we still have to try to practice it. It is a practice skill. It's not just something that you can just naturally go, oh, that's 345 feet. It's difficult to do. So because knowing that it is difficult, we do try to just tell people, hey, you just need to go do that activity where it's obvious that you're more than 300 feet away.
Yeah. One other question that we had, maybe it was at last year's meeting, Deputy Klinkefus said that if you could take a picture of damage to your dock and the boat that did the damage to your dock, that he would pursue those offenders. Is that still the case?
Oh, absolutely. So the excessive wake is still applicable under state code. So the state code defines excessive wake as, and I'm kind of paraphrasing that, but if your wake creates damage to someone else's property, that is an excessive wake as defined by Idaho state code. So yes, if you can say that this boat created this wake that created that damage, then we can follow up on that. And essentially what you would be doing is you would be signing a citation. We are essentially the messengers at this point. You would be charging that person for damaging your property, and you would actually go to court to testify against them. So it is still possible, but the issues that we've come up with, and the reason that the Kootenai County Commissioners redefined in county ordinance what the definition of excessive wake was, is because it is extremely difficult to prove in a court of law what excessive wake is, because the water does some weird dynamic things. And so your wake may be 2 feet and the boat next to you, their wake may be 2 feet. And as they climb over each other, it now becomes a 3-foot wake, which creates the damage. Well, which boat is at fault? And how do we know that damage to your dock isn't due to wear and tear over 10 years and now this reasonably sized wave broke it? That's the argument that we find in the courtroom, and why we haven't had a lot of success in charging people with that excessive wake. So the new definition for excessive wake under county ordinance, it gives us a lot more teeth, as far as it's very easy to identify how that excessive wake is created based on the operation of the vessel or what's in that vessel to create that wake. And it gives the boaters an area where that is acceptable and where it's not acceptable. So the education part is just teaching them where they can and can't be when they're creating that wake.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. That's great. Thank you for explaining that. That's helpful.
Yeah.
It's coming up on 9 o'clock. Any other questions?
Just one more to go along with that from and this would be for are the boat regs in one place? State code says wake is too large if it damages property or swamps a boat. Local or county is now 300. Is there a singular collection?
Well,
if not, is there something that can be posted and maintained?
So in Kootenai County, we have the excessive wake ordinance based off of a no wake zone. So you're kind of talking about two different things, because state code doesn't give it a zone at all. It doesn't matter where you're at. If you've got two boats tied up in the middle of the lake and a really big boat goes by, causing those two boats to collide to create damage, that's excessive wake. Where county ordinance defines it as how that wake is created and kind of that zone. So I think what you're asking is both are still applicable, but for the issues that we've seen on both our rivers and lakes, it has to do with large wakes next to property because it's causing damage to shorelines and docks and vessels along the shoreline. That is where the majority of our complaints come from. So that new ordinance was curtailed to specifically target that issue.
Okay. Okay.
And the commissioners have even said, in fact, we met with Commissioner Filios last night at another meeting, and he even said this is really kind of a first step we wanted to look at. We talked a lot with me and Sergeant Klinkefus and my teams and what we've observed. We've been very happy with the education of the public thus far. We don't know that it's a perfect ordinance, but it's definitely a step. So we thank them immensely for taking some sort of step to help protect property owners around the lakes and rivers. But at the same time, they are of the understanding that it may need to be critiqued a little bit as far as maybe increasing the distance from shore or some different verbiage on how it's written.
Okay, thank you.
I just, for one, just want to thank all of the speakers tonight. You've been wonderful bringing all of our members information, and it's just invaluable what you bring to the table.
Yes, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And is there anything else for the good of the order?
Let me add a comment, Jeff. The location of the new buoys is at a latitude and longitude stipulated by the sheriff's marine deputies, with Sergeant Will largely. The line between the anchor and the buoy is going to have enough length to allow the buoy to be successfully floating in high water. So at low water, which is sometimes 4 feet difference here, maybe more, the buoy is going to be off to the side a ways, and depending on the direction of the prevailing wind. Point of all this is that if one of your neighbors is really annoyed about the buoy and goes out and measures it with the measuring gadget that you can buy, and finds that it's 190 feet, that's probably as close as we can get it. So if you have an occasion where somebody's pretty unhappy about the buoy being too close or not marking the 200-foot dimension correctly, remind them that this is not as precise as...
And that's actually something that we've discussed, and I think the consensus was that thankfully, when the water is low, that is not when our high boating traffic occurs. Mm-hmm. So it should that buoy should be really taut during the high water mark, which is when all of the boating traffic happens. Mm-hmm. And so we've talked about that, and if it becomes an issue, that's kind of one of those things that we will address when it comes up. But we do understand that it's going to move. It's not going to be exactly 200 feet. And even if we use that as a reference on a citation and a charging, we would still have to measure after citing someone for that, just to concur that, yes, if it's close, yes, they were still within that 200-foot mark. Does that make sense? So we just like we do on any of our other instruments, you know, if you get stopped for speed or anything else, we still have to verify those instruments are working. This would be dealt with just like any of our other instruments, where we would re-verify after a charge was made.
Thanks.
Right.
Hey, anything else?
Excellent meeting.
Yeah,
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
very much. I guess we're adjourned.
Thank you, Jeff, for putting this together.
And
let me just make one comment. I've got an excellent board, and they make it look easy.
Oh. Well, you make us look great too, Jeff. Wanted to also remind everyone present that Will is going to have this on YouTube tomorrow. So if you know of neighbors or friends or acquaintances that were not able to attend tonight, please encourage them to tune in to watch the YouTube tomorrow.
And are you going to send out the link to the YouTube?
Yes, it'll be on the front page. So yeah,
Great,
It'll be all.
we'll get it out.
great. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye
Good
bye.
Thank you to all the board for your care
Oh,
and your passion for
oh,
caring for the lake.
thank you.
It's very, very appreciated to all of you. I know you're volunteers,
Oh,
and I thank you.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.